Welcome back, y'all. Welcome back to another video, man, with your boy Mar, man. I'm glad to be here, excited, man. And I'm not gonna lie, man, it's been too long. It's been way too long, man. So I have been recording, I have some videos in the tuck for you guys, but it's been a long time since I posted. I've been really busy, just getting stuff done, working, living life. You guys know how that goes. But I need to get some energy because I'm excited to be back here, man. It's my boy Totally Not Mark, and I'm gonna start the next clip rolling because I have to come back and do this. But I just wanted to say, man, I'm excited to be back, man. Make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. I'm going to try to keep coming with you guys, keep trying to interact. I appreciate all the love I've gotten so far, and let's keep it going, man. So without further ado, let's dive into the reaction. He basically goes over the animes and does some type of his own blind review where he comments on kind of what he thought it was. It just kind of highlights the points that really stuck out to him, whether it's emotional, whether it's a fight scene, whatever it is. And what it did for me is it really just gave me a chance to go down memory lane. It was very nostalgic for me. Totally Not Mark is definitely a great watch if you haven't watched it. If you love anime, you want a chance to go down memory lane, that is the channel for you. And he's definitely probably my top 3 anime YouTubers, which you guys will see over the course of me reacting. So just wait and see. But without further ado, we're going to click on this one. So like I said, he went into his 100% blind review. This time, though, he is going over Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. So I'm excited about this one. For those of you who don't know, if you haven't watched my video earlier on Ichigo is stronger than Naruto, I also actually hinted at this as well, that Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is my favorite anime. Edward Elric is one of my favorite characters of all time. So if you want to catch my attention, do something with Fullmetal Alchemist. So this is my shit. Sorry for my language, YouTube.
With Wix, you can edit your meta tags page by
No money for me.
Fullmetal Alchemist is freaking sneaky, okay? Oh, let's do some lighthearted adventure for the first 4 chapters and then... Are my emotions a joke to you? This chapter has left a void in my soul, and the only thing that can fill it is more of this incredible story. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's take a step back. When I grew up, I spent a lot of time watching Dragon Ball and not a lot of time watching anything else. And over the last 3 years, I've tried to fix that by covering some of the most respected, crazy, traumatic, and popular manga in circulation today. However,
Marcus definitely did that. He covered some crazy anime. But ain't that the truth, though? I feel like as a kid, man, the only anime that I ever watched was Dragon Ball, excluding Naruto. I'll give Naruto his credit. And if we wouldn't throw him a shoe, Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess. But Dragon Ball was like the only anime that existed from like I was born in 2000. So I would say from year 2008 to like 2013, 2014, the only anime anybody talked about was Dragon Ball Z and Naruto. So he's definitely hitting on something right there. But yeah, he has some fire content, like I said earlier. So let's tap in.
not yet come across anything quite like this before. Fullmetal Alchemist is a story that since its completion in 2010 has been widely praised as perfect. And in addition to you guys asking for it every single day for the last 3 years straight, this story has also featured as the #1 anime on many high-profile lists across the web. Mm-hmm. Which means for the next...
Because anybody who's anybody knows that this is the best anime ever. I don't know an anime that has... I'm about to go on a tangent, just forewarning. I don't know an anime that has a better storyline, character development, music, emotional toll. Like, literally anything you're looking for in anime in this. How is it not the best? There's no anime better. Please leave a comment of a better anime than Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Please. Please.
3 videos I will be, for the very first time, trying to figure out if it's deserving of this praise. Reading and sharing my first impressions of Hiromu Arakawa's sneaky and deeply upsetting supposed masterpiece, Fullmetal Alchemist. Take a seat, everyone. This should be fun. But I digress. This manga has the strongest first page I've ever read. It illustrates the singular event that kickstarts this entire story, all the while interweaving.
Now, any comments he has on the manga, I actually can't say anything about. I haven't read the manga for Fullmetal Alchemist, so maybe that's something for me to go do. But I have seen both animes multiple times, the original Fullmetal and obviously Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. So I can comment a whole lot on that, but I have not seen the manga. So if I'm quiet around that, that's why. But let's tap in.
The core message of it. In just 1 page and 4 panels, Arikawa tells a story of catastrophe, realization, despair, and consequence. The likes of which I've never seen so concisely conveyed before. I've read a lot of manga on this channel, some truly great pieces of storytelling. However, when I tell you all that this is the single strongest first page I've read, I want to emphasize that fact as true. For example, I got chills when I read this line. For humankind cannot gain anything without first giving something up in return. Beyond this, the first 4 chapters are largely centered around standalone stories that we as readers believe to be unrelated to one another at this point in time. They involve our 2 main characters, Edward Elric and his younger brother Alphonse, as they travel in search of something called the Philosopher's Stone to right the wrongs of their past. The first chapter contends with the antics of one self-appointed religious figure known as Father Cornello, one who claims he can raise the dead, to which Edward says, "Don't like the sound of that." Now, that's subtle, but it's a really nice piece of exposition expressed through character expression. It suggests Edward's negative experience with such a venture, and it just really makes me want to lean in and learn more about this world. I think what I love about this manga also is that for these first 4 chapters or so, it tries to hide the horror of this world for the most part behind humorous artwork and some truly great storytelling. But at the end of the day, the true nature of this story always manages to seep through the cracks. In chapter 1, a young woman called Rose wishes for Father Cornello to resurrect her deceased.
And that was a common theme throughout this. Like, there was like this masking of like everything is nice and calm and everything's peaceful and there's nothing wrong. And then, 10 episodes later, everything's chaos and everyone's evil and, everybody was lying and it's Two-Face and, that's a common thing in Full Metal. So he really isn't lying. The first manga was, as we see, very telling of the rest of the story.
Boyfriend. It's very heavy subject matter. Certainly not what I expected from a first chapter, but what follows again alludes to something more harrowing in Edward and Al's pasts, one that could explain their physical state presently. Furthermore, there's some godlike comparisons used here also, but not in the way that you'd expect. The comparison is made between Edward and Icarus, who famously failed at his mission, despite his greatest and most ambitious efforts to reach the heavens above. Furthermore, the story contained in Chapter 1 is sort of perfect in its placing. Much like the townsfolk, we the readers don't know of alchemy and how it's used, and once we see what Father Cornello can do, we accept that there must be some legitimacy to his claims of divinity. And what bonds us with Edward and Alphonse from the get-go is their lifting of the cloak on this conman and his hopes on this town. There are, of course, other stories like the mining one in Chapter 3, which paints this world in dirty shades of grey, the government being the antagonists in this instance. It seems that everyone in this world is fair game if they're
Bro, I can't stand this nigga right here. I don't know.
Returning to the conclusion of Chapter 2. It's explained to
Here we go.
stories like the mining one in Chapter 3, which paints this world in dirty shades of grey, the government being the antagonist
this nigga right here. I can't stand him. Every time he show up, he is extremely grimy. Like, for no reason. The thing when he was doing that gold stuff, we was trying to steal all the gold from that city, that was so messed up. Like, I don't know. I just can't stand him, man. He's grimy. And he keep popping up, too, throughout the whole thing. But he's grimy. And his mustache is stupid. Why is it so pointy? It don't even make sense.
Instance. It seems that everyone in this world is fair game if their motives are misplaced, which honestly just makes things that much more interesting to me. But no matter what, I keep returning to the conclusion of Chapter 2. It's explained to us that equivalent exchange is the rule with which this story abides by. That in order to gain one thing, something of equal value must be offered up in return. I mention this because the one rule of this world sort of defines these 2 boys and their journey. Ed and Al, or more specifically Edward. The character Arikawa writes spectacularly well. To show you what I mean, there are 2 quotes I want to
that scene right there hit. Like, I remember the first time I watched that. Like, that hits different. Because she had given up. Because, remember, she lost her brother. Remember, she was trying to transmute him back with Father Cornello. I mean, when she found out Father Cornello was lying, she really didn't have anywhere to go. And Edward was just telling her, like, you got your 2 feet, man. And that's real. Like, anybody who's ever really been down bad, or anybody who's ever been in a situation where they lost a lot, and they're just at, they're at their wits' end. That type of advice is hard to hear and take and really move with, but it's real. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, you still got your 2 feet. If you still alive, you can change and you can make something of your life. You can be happy again. You know what I'm saying? You can do anything you want to do. So that's really what he was saying, and just in that short little, you know what I'm saying, that short little statement. So shout out to Edward, and this is a powerful scene. Love this show.
And the first is from this exchange between Rose and Edward. Now disillusioned following Cornello's exposure, she's emotionally unable to let her boyfriend go, having held on to hope for so long, only to be let down at the very end. What Edward says to her in response to this begging can come off as cold, but speaks to the harsh reality of this world and the reality he's lived within alongside his brother all this time, saying that she has to figure out what her next step is alone. To stand
This is
up.
exactly what I was saying. This is exactly what I was saying. Like, you just have to keep moving forward. Like, there's nothing in life that happens to you is big enough to where you can't pick yourself up. Nothing. And that's just the truth. And when you get, especially, this is an extreme example, somebody who believed in something, religion, so much, you know what I'm saying, that she probably really lost herself and was believing in something that obviously wasn't reality. You can't bring people back to life. But even in a less extreme example, it's the same thing, man. Like, you got to keep going. You got to keep going. Life keeps moving. You got to, too.
And walk. And unlike them, Edward and Al, she has at least strong legs to take her to where she needs to go, suggesting that Edward believes she got off easier than he did. The second quote I want to draw attention to is a blink and you miss it quip. In chapter 4, while on the train, Edward says to Al that you can't move forward if you keep regretting the past. This line is played for laughs quite obviously in this scene, but even in the comedy of this manga resides the DNA of these characters, because this philosophy speaks to the type of person Edward is. He's quick to certain provocations, hands-on and resourceful, someone who thinks he always has an answer. And when things go wrong, he moves on with conviction, trying to do his best to make amends moving forward. For without that mindset, he'll forever get nothing done and fixate on the past. These 4 chapters are quite lighthearted in parts, but again are permeated by seemingly innocuous levels of darkness. That is until we get to chapter 5. Yeah, okay, we get the picture. This episode is fucked with a capital F, where all the other chapters had darkness in their background. With this, it's the very literal subject matter. When the 2 boys arrive from their eventful trip, their focus is squarely on bioalchemy, or more specifically to seek it out, to which they are pointed in the direction of one Sho, Tucker. He's introduced as the sewing life
If you don't hate him, I don't know how you don't hate this man. This man is evil. I was so sad the first time I seen this. This man is evil. If you don't, I'm not gonna spoil it. I ain't even gonna get into it because I'm gonna go in another tangent. Y'all seen the one earlier. It'll get worse. But I hate him. I hate him. Leave a comment about how much we all hate him. Let's just have a hating session about him in the comments. Shout out Tucker.
For having, at one point, 2 years ago, created a chimera, a fusion of 2 or more creatures that could talk. And that isn't even remotely the most screwed up thing in this chapter. Not by a long shot, and I think that's sort of the idea. The purpose of these first 5 chapters are to establish the main duo, reveal how moral they are, and in the background allude to something far more severe and dark. I'm not even kind of exaggerating that when it was revealed that Shou Tucker sacrificed his wife, his dog, and his daughter for the sake of his work, this manga evoked a fear deep within me, the likes of which I never even got from Berserk. And I think it has to do with what...
Facts. Like, I was like, what am I watching? Like, and it's in the beginning, too. Like, it's not like 60 episodes in. Like, that's one of the, I think it's the second manga, like you just said, so it ain't deep in. That had me scared for the rest of the anime. Like, what am I really getting myself into? Does this man really sacrifice his daughter for a job? For your license, G? It's crazy. Crazy.
5 chapters do best. Establish a precedent and then boom, contrast. The near misses become extremely tense and the deaths, well, they hit much harder too. So it's right around here we leave the tutorial area of the story and everything really starts to open up to us. We learn about the politics and the history of a group known as the Ishbalans. We learn more about gluttony, envy, and lust, and what's more, is we get to see some really clever animation. It's not flashy or anything, but when Scar shatters Edward's arm, Ed moves to crawl backwards, but falls because he's missing his arm. It's a very small detail, but it's one that I appreciate greatly. It's great character acting. But back on the topic of context,
It's one of the best fights in the show, especially if you're talking about like short, quick fights that had a lot of impact. That was a good one, and that really showed the power of Scar and how like they should really fear this man, even though it's just one of them. You know, it's not a whole army of dudes like they got, but he's that one, he's that guy. And this scared the living piss out of Edward, so he was scary after this for a minute.
generally speaking, this isn't so much a story with clear-cut sides. We've been bonded to many in the military, like Mustang, Armstrong, and Hawkeye, among others, but we can also sympathize with what's going on with the Ishbalan, formerly known as Scar. And moreover, the trio of Glut, Lust, and Envy seem to be against him too. But yeah, that's all I got for now. Time to go back to reading.
5 hours later.
Alright, I'm after reading a bunch more, and there's a mystery afoot, everyone. And we meet a girl called Winry that has such a cool design with her jumpsuit, and then a really...
Winry's a baddie. Shout out to Winry. W.
nice guy dies. My head hurts. Alright, let's get into it. Things might seem complex right now, but it kind of isn't. Which is interesting because this story doesn't really pack itself full with information. At least not in any obvious way. And I think that's perhaps the most clever thing about this story that I've observed so far. From this point on, there's a lot of mystery surrounding a supposedly evil plot and its connection to the Philosopher's Stone that Ed and Al are searching for. And with all of that on my dinner plate, I never felt too full or overwhelmed by the exposition. Yeah. When I was reading One Piece week to week, I would be writing up like 20-page documents of notes, taking account of everything that I thought would be relevant and worth addressing in a video, while also slamming like 6 to 9 volumes every 4 days in a sweat. One Piece, it's intense. It's not for the faint of heart. Only those with the strength and will to become the Pirate King, that is. But with Fullmetal Alchemist, I feel so much more relaxed. This is one long, continuous story, and Arakawa is interested in telling it at her own pace, and honestly, it's phenomenal. She has such a keen eye for picking out certain intimate moments and creates space for us to bathe in them for a little while.
Basketball is back. Watch the action live with YouTube TV. Try it free.
Let's see if there's another one. Just gonna do another.
Who's bumping?
Yeah, I just muted. But she really does, and I think one thing I do like about Fullmetal Alchemist is it really takes advantage of your emotions. Like, it takes its time. Like, them scenes when he goes home and he's on the train, and he runs up and the dog runs up to him, you know, and Granny's out there and she's messing with him, calling him short or whatever, and they joke back and forth. And, you know, Alphonse playing with, you know, taking his head off and the dog playing with it. Or them doing their little sparring matches while they're out there by the water. Those are some of my favorite scenes in the show just because it calmed it down so much and it gave you that realness. And then it's going to hype it back up and he's going to be, you know, out there at Fort Briggs, you know, fighting somebody in the snow. So, like, you know, you're going to get all of it. You're going to get all the action you want. But I think, I mean, he said it best. I think that those moments where it calms down and you get to see the little details, or even Winry and her soft heart and how much she loves Edward and Alphonse and everybody, those moments really define this show. So he's right. And a lot of other shows are lacking.
Longer than other stories I've read through have given me. And this creates so much more natural investment for me as a reader because I want so desperately for these characters that I am now invested in to get their happy endings. Where Dragon Ball would be way too busy shoving in some fight scene, or in the case of One Piece, would be way too busy shoving in as much story as possible. It's a good thing. Please don't kill me, One Piece community. Fullmetal Alchemist, I am happy to say, has a wonderful balance of the two and has struck a very satisfying approach for me, I think. But enough generalities. I alluded to a mystery element within this story. The Philosopher's Stone and its supposed connection with the plot Lust & Co. are carrying out. On their way to Winry for repairs, Ed and Al stop to talk to one Dr. Marco, whose research is directly tied to what Ed and Al are desperately looking for. This is where the mystery is turned up to 11. He uses a Philosopher's Stone and is known all around the area as a guy that can just heal people with miracles, so to speak. But the conflict here is that Dr. Marco doesn't give Ed anything other than a riddle to solve. And that is to find the truth that lies within the truth. What the hell does that mean? Ed and Al are now faced with solving this mystery.
Now I know we all was looking around like, bro, what, bro? I remember when I first seen it, I'm like, bro, the truth within the truth, what? What was Dr. Marco on, man?
This riddle that leads to the next step in this web of confusion, and someone is hiding something, but what is it? Suddenly the story has gone full-blown mystery noir and I am all here for it. It's such a rare atmosphere for a shonen manga to try and employ so successfully. Anyways, That riddle meant that the government, I think, were using prisoners as sacrifices to create more Philosopher's Stones. For what reason? I still don't know, but this is how far we are. Al and Ed go to investigate, but are cut off before they can discover anything by 2 souls. Well, okay, technically 3 souls, but they're all trapped in 2 suits of armor. They both beat their attackers, and just as Ed's dude is about to spill the beans... This story is screwed up. Despite his meddling, despite his looking for the truth, for some reason they let Edward live. Why? What's the significance? What's happening? Okay, jokes aside, I do have a theory, but...
He's the main character, of course.
But I have to wait a teeny bit longer.
Fullmetal Alchemist.
You want to talk about a goat? He's a goat.
When I first saw this Hughes guy, I was primed to hate him. I was entrenched in my big brain mode of constantly trying to suss out and analyze who the secret bad guy might be. This series definitely has one somewhere, and Hughes was too nice. He loved his family, perhaps too much. That could be motive, right? Well, it turns out he's actually awesome and one of the coolest characters in the series. He gave Winry a place to stay when she was repairing Ed's arm after the Lab 5 fight, and he even manages to deliver one of the most tense scenes in the series. This is another moment where Fullmetal Alchemist turns the drama up to 10 and we are all drawn in. Reading through this segment of the manga, I was immediately convinced of Hughes' innocence and was on his side 1,000,000%. Knowing full well that things were likely going to go south for the character, he found some key information that blows this whole case wide open, and that's the problem. Buddy escapes like a mad lad, losing a lot of blood but in the depths of pain and at the brink of death. He takes every precaution he can to send the relevant information, but he can't get through. It's tragic, and not even the best part of this fallout. Colonel Mustang and he had this straight guy, funny guy dynamic thus far, and with Mustang putting up with Hughes' antics for the sake of peace. But when we were at the funeral, and we see Mustang reflect on this, it's clear to see what Hughes meant to him specifically, and how badly this impacts him. Which means, moving forward, he's determined to come to grips with how he died, and more importantly, why he died. And once he gets to the crime scene, watching his detective abilities on show was fascinating. It's so easy to write these kinds of deductions like a super genius tying inconsequential pieces of information together in nonsensical fashions. But Arakawa does so here in a clever but grounded way. Mustang observed that Hughes chose to call from an outside line because he must have had reason to. Perhaps their ranks are compromised or involved. This is a perfectly reasonable deduction for him to make. Furthermore, once Armstrong arrives on the scene, Mustang reads in between the lines of what he says to him, inferring he has a gag order from someone higher up than even he, and understood from his wording that there are 2 murderers on the loose. I love this mystery surrounding the government, the Philosopher's Stone, and how the Ishbalans play into it, not to mention Edward and Al. It's fascinating, and in making us want to figure this out, it also makes us focus on the world building all that more.
Yep, and it comes together so beautifully. So now you're stuck into this big mystery with the Ishbalans and the Philosopher's Stone, so you're trying to figure out, like, how do those two, like, coincide? You're trying to figure out why is Hughes dead and how does Homunculus have to do with, like, you're just trying to figure out all these different puzzles and put it all together. And you know it's all going to circle back to be Edward and Alphonse as the main characters and the main, you know what I'm saying, point to this mystery. So it's probably one of the biggest mystery thriller type situations I've ever been in an anime. And the only one I would say having more excited than this one is Steins Gate, as far as the story and the mystery of it goes. So, that's me.
I'm gonna be real, not much happens in Rust Valley in terms of plot progression, but a lot takes place in terms of world building and context for the narrative. Seeing this place where all the main soldiers go to after the war to get themselves some nice looking prosthetics is both interesting and unsettling, with even the inhabitants saying as much, with a new character called Paninia's Legs acting as the launching point that transports us up this mountain to find a dude to train.
Panini was a thug. I rock with Panini. With the knee rocket, she said... I rock with Panini. She was
in the ways of making better automail and, of course, childbirth. Functionally, this place acts as a sobering reminder of the world that they live in, all the while offering up Winry her little hyperbolic time chamber arc. And once she emerges from this place, she will no doubt make something awesome for Edward. I think a large part of the story's appeal comes from a tormented world being seen through the innocent and well-meaning eyes and actions of two young children. These two, Edward and Alphonse, are our only anchors to this world, and we make sense of it with the help of these two. And after traveling so far to get answers to seek out training so that they may be better equipped to continue their journey, it made me stop to think for a moment. The following portion of story concerns itself and deals with the context surrounding the events that took place on that day that they lost everything. It's tragic, heartbreaking, and every other similar adjective. But at the end of the day, this is a story about equivalent exchange. Will the hardship the two boys inevitably have to go through be enough in exchange for achieving their ultimate goal? It isn't uncommon for shonen stories to concern themselves with the protagonist pushing towards some unreachable goal. In fact, it's sort of a staple of the genre and many other films, for that matter. The indomitable spirit of these characters as they take on the world, so to speak. Whether it be Luffy's journey to become the Pirate King or Goku surpassing his limits to overcome some great evil. The theme of fighting against impossible odds is one that's become integral for many of these stories. However, what I believe sets this one apart is that the goal is something which is described as quite literally impossible. Its impossibility is a staple of the world, its rules and the greater narrative. It's what sets the goal apart from most others I've read about. Because where there was hope in One Piece and Dragon Ball, here it seems to be the case that there is none. And the tone of the narrative seems to reflect that. Unlike Goku, who just needs to try harder, or Luffy, who needs to keep searching and adventuring for the One Piece that we are all told time and again exists, by the way, when it comes to Edward and his brother, there isn't a clear path forward, and every sign points to this being impossible. Which means there's no obvious journey. Instead, this goal is shrouded in mystery, with us as viewers and indeed these characters uncertain as to whether even the direction they're pushing.
And I think that, for me, made it so relatable. Like, you don't know if what you're dreaming of is possible, or what your ambition, what you really want is possible. And so when you're going after it every day, there is like that inkling of doubt, like, is this really possible? Can I really be, what I really want to be, or can I really accomplish the goal I want to accomplish? So yeah, I think that part of it I really did relate to.
Will get them closer to where they ultimately want to be, or if it's simply more wasted time. Normally, an approach like this would leave an audience in want, or at the very least, confused. Generally speaking, we know how Goku overcomes the next threat, training and practice. Similar observations and expectations can be made for the likes of Luffy. However, with Edward and Al, there's no expectation beyond just not giving up in the face of literal impossibilities. And brilliantly, what's communicated through such a framework is an impressive and deeply relatable set of circumstances for me. It's a fascinating take on the genre, and one that grants this tale an air of darkness and misery that permeates through the pages I've read, but not in a way that's so overwhelming it detracts from the experience. And as a result, at this point in my adult life, where problems with no obvious solution present themselves more often than not, watching these two tirelessly search in the face of unwavering impossibility with earnest and optimism was both incredibly inspirational and tragic. The anime adaptations. While this series, like the vast majority of reviews on this channel, focuses on the original source material, the manga in this case, it would be completely irresponsible of me to ignore the two anime adaptations this series has received. Particularly,
if your business kept employees on payroll throughout the pandemic, Innovation Refunds can see if it may qualify for a payroll tax refund.
Particularly when one of them has topped every single fan-voted best anime list for over a decade. And frankly, it's very easy to see why both are so beloved. Regardless of which version you pick, you're going to find yourself drowning in a sea of phenomenally well-directed and animated scenes. These are exemplary productions, and it's the quality on its floor rather than its ceiling that I think is one of the number one reasons it's sustained itself in people's memories for so long. They are firing on all cylinders in ways few studios can sustain, particularly across over 4 cores of consistent production. And it's how this was achieved that's perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of both series' productions. And I am of course referring to its outsourcing. The thought of outsourcing tends to conjure up thoughts of melting productions and poor animation quality, or it's seen as a cheap, corner-cutting alternative to in-house creation. And while it's easy to see why that's the case, particularly in the modern era of anime productions, outsourcing is not inherently a bad thing. Take Dragon Ball Z, for example. Almost all of its episodes are outsourced to studios outside of Toei, even those widely considered some of the strongest of the series. The reason for this is simply due to how anime episodes are made. Multiple episodes are in production at once with teams dedicated to each of them, and they rotate through episodes to keep the production flowing. When you have a show with a huge number of episodes, there's only so much staff at a time that can be able to be dedicated to them, and so outsourcing becomes a necessity to 1. Allow the production to exist in the first place, and 2. To allow bigger episodes to have more time for their completion. 2003's Fullmetal Alchemist anime had 21 of its 51 episodes outsourced. That's almost 2 full seasons of anime. In Brotherhood's 64 episode run, 25 of those were entirely outsourced too. Studio names like PA Works, Doga Kobo, Helicom, and A1 Pictures are just a few who worked on these shows, and I'm sure some of you savvy fans will notice some of these support studios have since gone on to produce high-quality shows all on their own.
A1 is a big studio now. That's a very big studio now. They produce some of my favorites. I don't know off the top, so I'm not going to name them. But I see A1 Studios a lot. That's interesting. I wouldn't guess that they outsourced it, especially with it being such a big name. I would not expect that, and I didn't know anything about that. So that's some good stuff to know.
Surprised then that much like the Dragon Ball example I used earlier, some of its best episodes came from those external studios. And then when you throw in Studio Bones' top tier staff on top of that. For those that may not be aware, given how much Bones has become a household name in their own right these days, the studio was actually formed from Sunrise's strongest production team by its producer, Masahiko Minami. As a result, it still maintains strong ties to mecha animators to this very day, and while Fullmetal Alchemist doesn't exactly have much in the way of mechs, there's a work ethic and craftsmanship that carries over regardless. Its wide array of talented animation directors will not only correct faces for model accuracy, but often go above and beyond to elevate the scene as a whole. And really, it all comes together to explain just how these shows maintain an absurd level of polish during even its lowest moments. On the 2003 side of things, the series is led by director Seiji Mizushima, who is lovingly nicknamed Fatty by his staff, and is the person the director was based off of in the Shirobako anime. I don't think that's a nickname that's looked on all too kindly these days, but by all accounts he was a real joy to work under, and the team had a great deal of respect for him in spite of that nickname. But for the most part, his directorial experience was mecha related, but he led the Shaman King anime in 2001, and while that series certainly doesn't shy away from its mech influences, I think the ability to also capture that fun shonen energy made him the perfect fit for a series like Fullmetal Alchemist. For the Brotherhood adaptation, Fullmetal Alchemist found itself directed by an animator turned director who, much like so many of Bones' staff, also had intense ties to mecha anime. He's someone who's been quite vocal about his love of Hayao Miyazaki's work also, citing Kiki's Delivery Service as one of the reasons he got into anime in the first place. It's an influence you can very clearly see in his debut show, Kurao, Phantom Memory. It's just chock full of solid layouts with a real emphasis on the fundamentals of animation. However, that show was only 2 cours long, and that meant he was able to have a real hands-on approach to directing, using his strong drawing skills to really elevate the production itself. Contrast, Brotherhood's 64 episodes were more than double the length of Phantom Memories, and so that approach was simply never going to work. Instead, he had to lean heavily on the individual directors and storyboard artists on board the production. Delegating duties like that can be scary and sometimes leads to jarring disparity in quality across episodes, but thankfully he was blessed with a very strong directorial team within Bones itself, and a lot of that outsourcing sure helped alleviate the pressure too. In the behind-the-scenes sections of any other video, now would be an incredible time to talk about the character designers for each show, but I think with both series sporting seriously impressive design work either way, it's an element that's wholly down to preference on the whole, really. 2003's designs came from Yoshiyuki Ito, who's arguably a bit of a legend in this department. He's done some spectacular designs for the likes of Space Dandy, Hiso Maso, and there's a really distinct flavor to his work that seeps into his Fullmetal Alchemist designs too. They sport a far...
Fullmetal is one of the best design animes probably out, especially if you're talking about like his style and the styles of everybody in the anime. Especially Edward. Edward individually is dripped out. You know what I'm saying? The red trench coat, all black leather boots, all black, blonde hair man with the braids, crazy. Drip is crazy. So, and the pocket watch. I forget the pocket watch. So, but yeah, I do love the design of Fullmetal, and it's pretty. The visuals are pretty. The backgrounds, everything's just pretty. It's very appealing, very visually appealing. Fullmetal is.
sharper edged than the manga's artwork and really leaned into the idea of an adaptation rather than a perfect copy. On the flip side, Brotherhoods came from Hiroki Kano, whose design background really only extends to Razaphone and the Yu Yu Hakusho movie. In spite of this, his work here is remarkably competent too, with a staunch adherence to Arakawa's rounder and looser style. It looks great and really helps to sell the idea that Brotherhood exists to represent the manga as a whole, while 2003 veered off in its own direction by necessity. However, where both series really shine are their individual animators, the key players, the major stars, and I think to do them justice, they require their own space for a thorough exploration of what they offer each series. I'll be sure to include their section in future videos regarding this topic. But in the meantime, I think it's important to cover an aspect of the anime that is arguably as defining as its visuals. It's music.
Fullmetal might have the best music out of all anime. Don't quote me on that, though. Because you got Bleach, you got Naruto, you got One Piece. Those all have great music. No one's ever going to argue that. But Fullmetal's music? Them intros? Ooh. Samurai Champloo. We're talking about great music. Samurai Champloo. Okay, you know.
Similar to the visual production side of the anime, it's hard to go wrong with music for either anime adaptation of the story. Both excel in their respective approaches and bring with them tracks and motifs that have since become deeply beloved by nearly all who watch the shows. But what I find interesting between both of them is that they do have different approaches. Fundamentally, I mean. And I think those differences really highlight the differences in general direction both shows took in their adaptations. The original series score was composed by Michiru Oshima, and when I first watched it, I was honestly surprised by how grounded and earthy the whole thing felt. Both scores are certainly rooted in a sense of emotion and wonder, but Oshima's focus really seemed to be on the down-to-earth aspect of the story. Most of the tracks feature a lot of instrumentation that feels familiar to us as viewers. Strings, horns, drums, the whole 9 yards. Whereas with Brotherhood's score, composed by Akira Senju, it was immediately clear to me how different the two composers envisioned this story and its world. Senju has gone on record in interviews saying he purposely didn't watch or listen to the 2003 series before composing Brotherhood, but rather read the manga and tried to imagine up what the world would sound like. And where Oshima heard a grounded story set in a fantastic world, Senju clearly heard a story of fantasy, tragedy, and hope. Brotherhood's score focuses deeply on its emotional beats and a sense of fantasy and wonder. Pianos, string sections, and choral arrangements are everywhere in this score. There's a very grandiose nature to it all. It reminds me of something like Lord of the Rings, where its music and direction
like
made
big.
each...
Like, it's big. Like, it makes you excited. Like, you get hyped when you watch Fullmetal. Especially them scenes at the end, like, all that action that was going on. I mean, it's just, when the homunculus were actually attacking at the end, like, those scores were crazy. So, he's definitely right. Like, it just builds up this anticipation. I love it.
And feel like the audience was lucky to be witnessing history in the making for these fantastic worlds. And yet, there's something that just keeps bringing me back to Oshima's 2003 approach to the show. No, don't get me wrong, the Brotherhood soundtrack is packed to the brim with absolutely wonderful works of music, helping the adaptation elevate its emotional beats higher than ever before, but I personally feel really drawn to the more grounded approach of the original show's score. As I read through the manga, the story and its world really did feel like upbeat characters with fantastical powers that feel secondary to the conviction and heart in the face of seemingly relentless negativity and impossible odds. So the direction of leaning into the character-driven element rather than the fantastical resonated with me personally. It's a direction I don't think a lot of composers, when tasked with writing for a story as crazy as Fullmetal Alchemist, would take. It very much reminds me of John Williams' score for Star Wars, where you also had this extremely fantastical universe and events, but instead had the music focus on the earthly minutiae of the characters. Hell, there's even a fair bit of Star Wars trademark flugelhorn in Fullmetal Alchemist 2. But, jokes aside, the grounded atmosphere of this otherwise fantastical story is what draws me in so feverishly. In a world that's written to be filled with so many wondrous things, it stands to Arakawa that I myself am, more than anything else, enthralled by the story surrounding the two main characters, and I think there's very good reason for that. Once Ed and Al arrive at Izumi's place for training, it becomes clear that this section is going to deal with predominantly one thing: flashbacks. and it's interesting to sit and read through. We're painted a bleak picture of a mother dying of a sickness we never see her have. We see resentment for a father that's never there, and two very young kids looking to move mountains to save the only family they have. It's heartbreaking, and we haven't even seen the unnatural, torturous heartbreak yet. Having returned from their training with Izumi, we see the fabled event that's been alluded to from the...
And, like, their childhood is sad, especially when they go back and, like, shows their dad walking out. And, like, the mom getting sick and, like, that whole journey, like, they really went through a lot. They went through a lot in their childhood. So, to see them come back in the end and, you know, everything work out for them is awesome because they went through it. They went through it.
First page, the transmutation circle that almost cost them both everything. And this section is remarkably simple looking in the manga. Having come away from stories like Berserk, which depict dark fantasy horror better than anyone else, part of me was a little underwhelmed with how this looked in the manga, but in hindsight, I'm glad that once again the emphasis was on the characters and their dialogue. Getting a view of what happens in this transcendent state with Ed is a really cool idea, and I feel like it's littered with hints for the future and the mystery of this series, but honestly the most traumatic part is what follows. It's the aftermath, Ed's realization, his sacrifice, what creature he ends up creating in attempting to create his own mother. It's utterly horrifying, and the following reinforces the reasoning behind why Winry and Granny are so close to these two young boys now. I want to talk more about Al and Ed at the end of this video because I think their dynamic with this world is the key to this series, but right now I'd like to make a prediction, okay? It's theory time. In the immediate chapter after these events, we get the boys' first interaction with the government, and it's with Ron Mustang. Ron Mustang. Ron Mustang. But interestingly, due to some mistakes made on a government recruitment document, he arrives in town to pick up the Elric brothers, thinking that they were both in their 30s, but I think this is way too coincidental, and this story is way too tightly written for something.
And he came in crazy. If y'all ever seen this scene where Mustang just walks in, this is the day after they transmuted and did all this stuff. So he hasn't even had the surgery yet to get his arm amputated. This is before that. So this man is messed up. He just lost his mom twice. Like, come on, bro. Like, why you picking up his shirt? Chill. Like, you don't even know him. Chill. This was crazy. I'm not gonna lie.
That to just be coincidence. Following this event, Ed is seen as someone special, and seeing as we haven't seen his father in the picture at all, I'm going to guess that he's behind this decision. Maybe as a way of protecting his kids, or perhaps, more likely, to take advantage of their current circumstances as students of Izumi and now having tried to transmute life itself. If either of these are true, then that would mean that their father needs to be someone high up in the government or military, someone who has access to these documents. This also explains his consistent absence. I mean, it can't be Mustang, he's too young. It can't be Hughes, he's too dead. It could be Armstrong, the hair color matches and he cares for them quite a lot. And it could be President Bradley too, but we don't really know much about this fellow beyond that he has a network of intelligence and wants the boys out of the current investigation, which tracks with this. With that said, it could still all just be coincidence. The writing for this flashback isn't perfect. I mean, this is all framed, if you remember, as a flashback, a story Ed and Al are recanting to Izumi upon her request. But in this, we see conversations like that with Mustang or Winry that they weren't privy to. So how could they see these people's perspective?
How did you know about the parts you weren't there for?
I don't know personally, but what I do know is that Bradley seems to be following Edward around like a love-struck teen lately. Which brings me to my favorite part of this story so far. Okay, Bradley's a bad guy. Damn it! I predicted this a while ago, and my hope was to end this video with this being my prediction. Now everyone's going to think I read ahead and just wrote something like, oh yeah, this dude's totally a bad guy. I definitely didn't read ahead to spoil myself. So no, I'm not lying. I knew it. I predicted it. Please believe me. The following section is the most compelling, or at the least, most action-packed part of the story so far that I've read. It's got revelation, tension, and filled with promises for the future. Alphonse
To comment on that Bradley thing, he was probably the most obvious of everybody. Like, that was disguising himself was really a villain. Like, I feel like everybody knew King Bradley was a villain. At least I did. I felt like I knew. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just saying that because I've seen it a bunch of times. But I felt like I knew that the first time I seen it. I felt like it was pretty obvious. But who am I?
is tasked with rejogging his own memory concerning the events or visions he saw that very night he lost, physically, everything. According to Ed himself, he saw something that brought him closer to the answer they needed, but when it came to Al, he's forgotten everything. And thus is the goal of this next section. The way Arakawa goes about it is by creating a complicated spider's web of mixed motivations. We're introduced to the latest and best sin, Greed, who along with his lackeys kidnap Al so that he can reveal to them his secret to immortality. Greed is an infectious personality, roguish and boisterous. He fears little and never stops talking. He's exactly the sort of character that makes for a fantastic scene partner for the likes of Al, who seldom speaks in comparison. On the other side of this, we have Izumi and her husband, who offers so much comedy, my sides were hurting just reading through it. I'm a big fan of the protective but gritty persona Izumi exudes too, but the real interest doesn't take shape until Ed, who up until this point had been seeing to his alchemy assessment, finds himself followed by Bradley back home, where he realizes that Al is in trouble, kidnapped. Seeing Edward in this big brother role is awesome to see, and what's hilarious is that Greed, who was up until this point the most unstable personality, once he meets Ed, he realizes what he's up against. This is a kid who isn't going to make a deal with such a dicey figure. The fight is compelling and Greed is terrifying. It makes me wonder if all...
Greed is a great villain, and this was like the perfect timing for this. It was right after the flashbacks and stuff, like you just said, so there wasn't a lot of action going on, and this like jumped us right back into the action. So I really remember really particularly liking this fight. And I love Greed. Greed is a very interesting person. He says some crazy stuff. So this was a fun fight.
Sins are capable of showing their true forms like this. But I think the most impactful part of all of this that people will remember and be in awe of is the reveal of Bradley. He is a competent fighter, yes, oh my god, yes, he's terrifying, but it's what happens in the sewer and the meeting he has later on with the other sins that really speaks to the terror of this situation. The military is compromised from the very top. He is led by this old man hooked up to a bunch of pipes. Maybe this is Edward and Al's dad now. I don't know, just throwing it out there, it's a complete shot in the dark. But all I do know is that Bradley was the one that named Edward the Fullmetal Alchemist. And with that being his official title and the name of this series, it makes me wonder if there's any significance to that name at all. Only time tell, I think. And so, bringing this video to a close, I find myself in an unfamiliar position as a reviewer looking at this for the very first time. Specifically because this story isn't at all like what I expected it to be. And while I have only read about 1/3 of this story presently, I feel like I am starting to understand the dynamic of Alphonse and Edward so much more clearly now. And what was once an interesting duo to lead this tale has helped me better appreciate what Arakawa is trying to say with them in a profound way. A cursory glance at this story might lead you to believe that Edward is the most important character in the story and that his brother Alphonse is a sweet but ultimately secondary player in this story, acting only as a motivating force to push his older, more active brother into action. And while I fell prey to that very thinking initially, now I'm embarrassed to have thought that ever was the case. For it's the dynamic these two share in accordance with the antagonists of this world that effectively make up what Fullmetal Alchemist is trying to say as a story. And I think what makes this story as emotionally resonant as it ultimately is. But what do I mean? There is a lot of philosophy in this story. However, for the purposes of this one point and prediction I'd like to make, I want to focus on 3 central points of view. Starting off with Edward. From the very first page, it's clear what the events that define Edward are. In Chapter 6, he's haunted by horrific dreams brought on by his guilt surrounding the incident. Right before their first run-in with Scar, he talks about how doubtful he is in the feasibility of getting his brother his body back. When I first saw Ed meet Dr. Marco, I saw this as a stark contrast between 2 very different individuals. Dr. Marco, someone who's haunted by the past sins of the government and military such that he harbors deep-rooted resentment, projecting them onto Edward, who I thought was convincingly not allowing his past to define him and instead push forward. The first time we see Edward in the manga is at the single most traumatic moment in his life before cutting to him pushing forward in a light-hearted fare. It demonstrates exactly who he is as a character. Tortured, yes, but also tenacious and convicted, working with his trauma in a productive way. And I thought that was it for a very long time, until Ed visits his mom's grave because he's restless. He wants to spend every single moment pushing towards his goal, making progress on a journey that seems hopeless, all the while Al, who has lost the most out of the two, is much more inclined to insist that they rest and enjoy the day. Edward has an outwardly good attitude towards leaving negativity in the past, but he seems to always be focusing on it, using it as a fuel, with the most pressing cost to him being his sacrifice of the today, the here and now. There's an interesting quote from Granny Pinocchio on Edward Elric and his nature in this chapter too. It says, "I wondered where in that little body all that strength was coming from. And because he's so strong, I worry that when he does finally find an obstacle he can't overcome, will he be able to get back on his feet?" By pairing this exposition with the small outing Edward is on to his mother's grave, it gives this chapter a very heavy and emotional atmosphere rooted in the mistakes of the past and how they inform our futures. Not just through Edward's tireless pursuit of answers to his greatest problem, but even with regards to the Ishbalan War that took Winry's parents and Granny Pinocchio's family. While those events took so much from them, it very much defines how they live now. Granting prosthetics is a successful business thanks to the war's aftermath, and similarly, that horrific past even now defines both Edward and Alphonse's lives as they know it. Exemplified almost immediately after once Ed gets his arm back for the very first time, he runs to repair his brother without hesitation. Everything he does, all of this study, all of the torment and struggle, it's not just for himself, it's for his brother, and that's what he cares about. So, let's talk about Alphonse. Alphonse, while having the most to gain from this mission, is the one who, interestingly, is more grounded in the here and now. While he still wishes to regain his mortal body, he does so for totally different reasons to why Edward pushes in such a direction. He wants the body not to make up some difference and to get even with the universe, but to instead better enjoy the here and now. There are massive ethical and physical struggles over the morality of extending a person's natural life towards immortality in this story. This is visually demonstrated through the horrific chimeras as well as all the actions of the sins themselves. In the case of Alphonse, he has everything the antagonists of this story want. He has an immortal existence on this plane, and that's exactly what makes him dislike his current existence so much. Because without being able to feel pain, taste good food, or feel the rain in his skin or the wind in his hair, it's all just a muted experience, a life that's practically meaningless. And you might think that Edward is closer to Al's outlook on life than the antagonists of this story, but I would argue differently. Unlike Alphonse, Edward is the one to blame for the bulk of what tragedy unfolded. He led the charge and as a result of that, met a series of crippling consequences along the way, both literally and figuratively. In order to right these wrongs he sees himself having committed, he doesn't allow his feelings to compromise his forward progression. However, in the same way the villains of this story have their focus squarely on the future they want for themselves, Edward's mind is consumed with guilt over his past. And nowhere is this more evident than in Rush Valley, where we learn of his state alchemist's pocket watch, where on the inside of it is etched a specific date, the 3rd of October. A date he promised himself he would never lose focus of. For those same reasons, he destroyed his family home. He is so consumed by the guilt of that event and the consequences he wrought on his own family that he has dedicated every waking moment to perfecting and investigating this mysterious power system in the hopes that one day it will reveal to him something that will allow him to move on with the rest of his life free of guilt, impossible as it seems to be. So in a way, he is as good and as talented as he is, not just because he's a genius, but because he's obsessed. And perhaps that's why he denies that compliment every single time it's offered to him. Alphonse has the immortality that everyone is after, and yet he hates it, while Ed is living in the past and others are worried about their futures. This is a story not just about equivalent exchange, but about life itself, what you need to give up on or not give up in order to lead a fulfilling life. And ironically, and tragically, Alphonse, who's always telling Ed to slow down and enjoy the moment, to rest and to have fun, he seems to be the only one who truly understands what life is all about, and that a great life needs to be one that ends at some point. And even if we want to take a step back and think about things more abstractly from Ed, Alphonse, or any other character in the story, perhaps the lesson is that we can't create full appreciation for something unless we lose it first in exchange. Next week, we're going to be going on to part 2 of this series. I hope to see you all there, and thank you all so much for watching.
Yes, sir. right, y'all. W video, man. Shout out to Totally Not Mark, man. What a great video. I love going down memory lane, man. That is just nostalgia at its finest. Fullmetal, it's a deep show. And at the end, I didn't want to interrupt him because he's really spitting. I mean, there's so much philosophy. If you really sit here and think about how deep this story is, you'll be thinking for hours. So, with that being said, man, thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment with anything you got to say about it. Please go tap into Totally Not Mark and watch some of his videos. Show him some love. He's a great creator. I love it. I'll be back probably tomorrow watching part 2. But thank you guys for watching today. I appreciate it. And Mars out.